My wonder was, I wonder if we could implement behavior management in the classroom with color. So this wonder started out a little more broadly as a wonder about color perception. How do we see and perceive color? I then thought about the psychological effects of color, why some colors were calming, others were stimulating. And this led me to think about what sort of effect color had on our classroom. This in turn made me think about how we might harness the power of color in our classroom and maybe even use it to our advantage in behavior management. And lastly, my wonder led me to consider how we could do this in a responsible way. So, color perception. How do we see and perceive color? So, light passes through the cornea of our eye, and some of this light enters through the pupil, but the iris controls how much light the pupil lets in right here. So that's like our camera aperture. Light passes through the lens. The lens works through the cornea to focus light on the retina, which is back here at the back of our eye. When light hits the retina, special cells called photoreceptors turn the light into electrical signals, and those signals travel from the retina through the optical nerve to our brain, and then the brain turns the signals into images. So do you want the truth? Color only exists in our brains. These flowers are not orange. We perceive them as orange because of the light, the wavelength of light hitting these flowers, and the flowers are reflecting the wavelength that our brain perceives as orange. It absorbs the other wavelengths, but it reflects the wavelength that we perceive as orange. Same with the green. It reflects the wavelength that we perceive as green. So, created by light, color is a form of energy, and it affects our body functions, our minds, our emotions. In short, our response to color is total. It influences us both physiologically and psychologically. So, a quick look at the visual spectrum, we'll see that the warmer tones are longer in wavelength, and the cooler tones are shorter in wavelength. And color is not the property of objects, just like we talked about. This flower is not orange. It's not the property of spaces. It's not the property of surfaces. It is the sensation caused by certain qualities of light that the eye recognizes and the brain interprets. We live in a rainbow of chaos, as Cezanne, the famous painter, says, and it's really true. All the color stimuli that we receive from the external world are connected with our internal world, our psyche. At the same time, we may consider that color is not just dependent on the external world, but it may also originate through the power of imagination of our inner world. Colors are impressions and sensations that activate our thoughts and our memories. So remember that green grass, you may not just think green grass. You might think about the last time that you were out on a picnic and you kicked off your shoes and you walked around in fresh cut grass that smelled delightful. You were with your best friend. You think of all these different things and they all get associated with that color. Frank Mankey, an architectural consultant and lifelong color researcher, devised a pyramid quantifying how different components of our surroundings dictate our color experiences and shape some of our universal reactions to color. So here he's broken down into 6 different parts the way we experience color, and how this is how we have so many different experiences of color. The bottom is that biological reactions to stimulus. So this is like the universal reaction to red. Red in nature is dangerous for us. So it raises our heart rate, and these are things that we usually share as human beings. Collective unconscious, excuse me, if you're a psychology fan, that'll sound familiar. That's a Jungian term. It has to do with archetypes and the symbolism of the archetypes and their color relations. Above that is the conscious symbol, which is like green always representing grass, blue representing sky. Above that are cultural influences and mannerisms. Different cultures perceive colors in different ways. Some cultures are really into super saturated colors, and others prefer more muted colors. So it really has to do with your cultural background. Above that are influences of trends, fashion, politics. And then above that is our personal relationship, which is our most intimate relationship to color. It's going to be where our memories are influencing the colors that we prefer. Okay, psychological effects. Why are some colors stimulating and others calming? So based on those 6 variables, which vary from person to person, no one's individual experience of color is going to ever be exactly the same, but we do have some shared experiences of color and shared characteristics and responses that we've discovered through various scientific experiments on color. So red's always an arousing color. It raises our blood pressure. It's a biological thing. It's comparable to a sympathomimetic stimulus, which is drug use. Blue increases inner reaction. It leads to calm and the ability to concentrate. Green is pleasant, agreeable, calming, and compelling. Yellow is mighty, tensing but releasing at the same time. Raises our motor activity. Excuse me. And purple is kind of a strange one. Purple is mystical, otherworldly, ritual, and magic. So what kind of effect does color have on our classroom, and what role does it play? Well, in modern color attitudes, color is considered just as important a design element as any other. Previous attitudes toward color in schools were that surroundings must be colorful, as young children are most often outgoing and energetic. Designers thought that the color of the environment should match the general temperament of the students. But a counter movement surged to gray out school walls, claiming that children already brought enough liveliness to the room. There didn't need to be added liveliness. Maybe it was too much liveliness as a byproduct of the two together. What happened was, and what was lost in this graying out, was that the more personal a classroom is, the more it will encourage students to liven it up. So a room devoid of color stimulation actually channels results into irritable and fidgety students. Exactly the opposite of what they thought they were doing. So one of the biggest studies of color in children was performed in the 1930s by a German gentleman named Heinrich Frieling. He was with the Institute of Color Psychology, and Heinrich tested over 10,000 children ages 5 to 19 across the world. And in elementary age students, he found that kids aged 5 to 8 rejected black, white, gray, and dark brown, and they preferred red, orange, yellow, and violet. So that's your kindergartner through 1st, 2nd grade. Kids aged 9 to 10, 3rd and 4th graders, rejected black, gray, brown, pastel, green, and blue. Excuse me. But they preferred red, orange, and green, blue. Kids age 11 to 12, your 5th and 6th graders, again rejected black, white, gray, olive, violet, lilac. Colors are getting a little bit more complicated there. But they preferred blue, ultramarine, and orange, which I thought was interesting because these are opposite colors of the color wheel, or complementary colors. Excuse me, but these are preferences. After several revisions, my wonder question finally landed here. Can we use non-permanent color, i.e. color without a large presence in the room, to affect an immediate change in student behavior? Being in a classroom long enough, you will learn to read the energy of the room. It's up, it's down, it lulls. So my question was, could teachers influence that energy to our advantage with color by, for example, turning on color lights, hanging color curtain panels, or simply displaying color that purports to elicit a specific reaction through the smartboard? Okay, so that brings us to point 4. How do we get this information? How would we collect it if we were doing an experiment? We could run classroom-wide experiments using knowledge of the universal reactions to color. Those are the red, the blue, the green, that have those main reactions, and a lot of that is biological. For a scientific purpose, we might also require student vital monitoring that would track their body's responses to those color displays. For a sociological approach, visible results could be recorded by a designated observer who recorded the perceived energy flux in the room while specific colors are introduced. This could be done asynchronously through video recording, but such observations would be limited by technology, truncating that first-hand in-person experience The energy of the room is really something you have to experience, and it can't always be translated through video. Inevitably, I think a mix of both observations would give us the most detail in proceeding with something that would really get us some results. Ah, yes, and so we must also consider that to thoroughly investigate this wonder, we have to think about Menke's 6 components of color experience, that color triangle, which would involve interviewing the students, their families, to determine their ecology, according to Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. So this is really where the culture comes in, where those personal memories come in. That's what you want to get at with these. And this would be uber thorough. I think it would be the most mindful way to proceed. In sampling different student populations, we could possibly find some commonalities that we could then begin to generalize and predict student responses. So 5, if it's purple, how can we practice mindfulness in color applications? We have to experiment with caution. We must be mindful of how we experiment with and use this behavior management technique. Why? Because if it's purple, someone's gonna die. What? Okay, not really. But purple can signify death. Colors can be highly manipulative, and using color might backfire. Menke warns, patients in a frantic or manic state may be sedated by the use of the cool hues and dim illumination, just as depressive patients may have their spirits bolstered by compensating warm and stimulating hues to direct their attention outward. But these are immediate therapeutic effects of temporary duration, and visual sedation or stimulation, whichever the case may be, cannot be prolonged because it loses its effectiveness in a relatively short time. So it would have to be a quick use of color. Couldn't be like leaving those panels up all day because it would be useless. It must be remembered too that in practical design, not only one color is present in a space, and this is because the viewer experiencer may have a positive or negative association and impression to a major hue. So we couldn't just put up one panel. We'd have to do 2 probably at least, or 3. And then that would get into, what if somebody has a bad association in one? How would the second affect them? If it's purple, somebody's going to die. It was a little silly joke. It's a fabulous little book that I looked at through research for this project. It's about the power of color in storytelling, and all about how color is used in cinematography. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, highly recommend it. It's very cool. And that is the end of my wonder. I think it would be really cool to be able to use color in behavior management. I wish I could do the full wonder and investigation. So maybe that's something down the road.